Welcome back to the Esoteric News Briefs, your source for the paranormal, the mysterious, and the weird. Tonight we have something a little bit different for you, but first, I want to thank my patrons, specifically Samantha Shaver, who has been a major donor to the show since its inception. Thanks to everyone's generous support, the Esoteric Book Club is quickly approaching its first 1,000 downloads. I couldn't do this without you, so thank you, weirdos. I also have to add a content warning for this episode, since it deals with animal diseases. While they will be described clinically, it may still be triggering for some people. Tonight, instead of summarizing articles for you, I have something special. We are currently in the midst of a unique situation. Folklore is actively being created. It's not often that we can see this as it's happening. Stemming from online posts in the early months of 2020, the cryptid known as the knot deer is making its way around the internet. Not only that, but it has entered oral folklore as well. I first found out about it from a customer who, while browsing illustrations of other cryptids, asked if I had ever heard of the knot deer. In short, because I don't have Reddit, the answer was no. I did some quick Google foo and found a brief description and some heavily photoshopped trail camera images. I'm not gonna lie, I was a little bit creeped out. Allegedly, the knot deer is an old folk tale from the Virginia side of the Appalachian Mountains. Curious about this phenomena, I began to ask around on various Appalachian forums. It turns out that nobody had ever heard of it. But the moment you describe what it is and how it behaves, people begin to take notice.
Yeah, I've not heard of it, but that sounds an awful lot like what I saw that one time.
This is a pretty common reply in response. Returning to Google, I did a deep dive and began to research everything I could find, and, frankly, I didn't uncover too much. What I quickly discovered is that the oldest account that I could find was a repost from Tumblr on January 5th, 2020. This post began very simply with an anonymous question. What do you mean by, "That's not a deer in the mountains near you"? The first reply came from a blogger with the username of Willow the Witch, who is the most often quoted intro to the knot deer, which reads as follows.
Anyone who spends a decent amount of time in Appalachia knows of the knot deer. If you've gone on the Blue Ridge Parkway at night, you've probably seen him.
It was this specific post that caused me to begin asking around about this creature, considering I've lived in Appalachia my entire life and I've never heard of it. Replies to the post continued along the same vein. Username Did You Notice replied with an account of an odd interaction with the deer while walking on a back road in the summer. Username Root and Rock upped the ante and told a tale about a deer-like creature whose leg joints bent in the wrong direction, or possibly they had extra joints. They said it was really hard to tell at the time. They also said that its face was more canine-like rather than like that of a deer. They further elaborated that the name deer comes from the older word dior, which simply means beast or quadruped. I checked this out on etymology.com, and the word does in fact come from the Middle English term for a quadrupedal beast, with roots going back to Proto-Germanic. So I was able to verify that part at least. The next source of accounts, and the most prominent source, comes from Reddit. I want to note that these accounts are what were available when I did this research, so if you're listening to this episode at a future time, there have likely been more posted. The oldest posts that I could find at the time were 2 years old, placing them in mid-2019. The first is simply a question, asking if anyone had images or art pertaining to the knot deer. The poster isn't certain what the creature is, but it was something they had heard of in passing and were looking for clarification. After that, the posts are a mishmash of personal accounts and people writing creepypasta. For those who are unfamiliar with the term, creepypasta is a combination of the word creepy and the term copypasta, which refers to a copy and pasted story on the internet. Creepypasta is now a blanket term for horror-related posts that are spread virally like memes. The most infamous creepypasta character is the Slender Man from the Something Awful forums. We heard his story on Season 1, Episode 3 of the Esoteric Book Club. What's different about the Not Deer when compared to the Slender Man is that with the Slender Man, we can pinpoint his origin. We know who created him and when. The Not Deer seems like it may have been something a bit more spontaneous. While I can find posts that reference them and narrow down when these posts were made, no one is taking credit for the Not Deer's creation. At this point, I'm sure you are all intrigued, but also wondering, what is a Not Deer? Compiling all the accounts I've read, the creature is not a singular entity, but a whole species that hides within a herd of normal deer, who otherwise treat it as one of their own. They are sometimes bigger than the standard whitetail, but usually they're about average size. They are disguised well enough that upon casual glance, no one would really notice them, especially if they were within a herd. If you take the time to look closer, you'll notice that its head isn't quite the same shape as a deer. It's similar, but it's shaped more like a dog's head. Their eyes, assuming they only have two of them, tend to face more forward than those of a normal deer, giving them more of a predatory appearance. In the rare instance that they have multiple eyes, they tend to extend down the muzzle in increasingly smaller sizes. I've seen people say they have between 4 and 6 eyes that all reflect yellow in the light. It's also been reported that they can turn their heads entirely around to look behind them, in much the same way that owls do. Sometimes, they have a more muscular, barrel-chested appearance that seems more like an elk or a moose. Their limbs tend to be longer than normal, and their joints either bend in opposite the normal way, or they have extra joints. The most peculiar behavior for the Not Deer is their tendency to stand up on their hind legs. In a few rare cases, this is when witnesses notice that the front limbs don't end in hooves, but instead with human hands. In one account I read, the creature was not covered in fur, but instead had stark white skin that accented its musculature. On March 10, 2021, Rowan Bagley, contributing author to the online Not Deer magazine, wrote an article on the publication's namesake. They expanded on the above descriptions, adding in a strange, jerky gait and occasional clicking noises. Their proposal was that the witnesses were seeing deer who were suffering from chronic wasting disease, an infection similar to mad cow disease that affects deer and their relatives. Chronic wasting disease attacks the central nervous system, causing emaciation, stumbling, listlessness, drooling, aggression, lack of fear, and ultimately, tumorous growths all over their body. What's disturbing about this disease is that it is often overlooked by other deer within the herd. Even though the victim is noticeably malformed, there is seldom any negative reaction to their presence. To anyone unfamiliar with deer, or even to those who are unfamiliar with the effects of chronic wasting disease, this set of symptoms would make a deer seem monstrous. You may be wondering about the bipedalism aspect of the Not Deer. Well, I can personally attest that deer can and do stand on their hind legs at times. More than that, they are sometimes able to take a few jerky steps on their hind legs as long as they're on stable ground. So while this is uncommon, it's not unheard of. I decided to look for other explanations and turn to those who are most familiar with deer behavior: hunters. In an article on white-tailed deer behavior on mossyoak.com, I found a section describing the signs of an aggressive deer, a situation not often seen by the average person. Usually these are displayed by bucks during the rut, but sometimes a defensive doe will display these traits as well. More so, the older the deer, the more they tend to act aggressively. The deer will lower its head so that it's at level with its shoulders. If it has antlers, they will be pointed directly at you. They will tuck their tail against their body, and some of its hair will stand on end. Their gait will be heavy but stiff, as if they're struggling to move. This couldn't be farther from the truth. Their gait is a result of their muscles being tensed, preparing for them to charge. Combine these aggressive movements with the neurological symptoms of chronic wasting disease, and you'll have a deer that is behaving quite oddly. What about the physical appearance? No one is really describing a tumor-riddled body. While I can't explain the appearance of human hands, or really multiple eyes, there is a malady that could explain some of the encounters. Albinism. An albino deer tends to look more like it has white skin rather than a layer of white fur. This also accents their musculature to a much greater degree. Couple that with their bizarre eye color and tendency for solid black antlers, and you have a frightening animal to see in the dark of night. Add in aggressive behavior and have it stand on its hind legs, and you have the prototype for a not deer. Granted, albinism in deer is rare, but so are these creatures. So where does that leave us? We have a general origin date for the online mythology and naming of the not deer, but many accounts and witnesses reveal that this is a much older phenomena that only just now has a name. Some of these encounters can be debunked through natural causes, such as disease, genetic defect, and seasonal change of disposition. Some stories could just be creepypasta. Whatever the explanation is, we are now witnessing the formation and creation of a new folkloric entity. The more the stories are shared, and the more they are expanded upon, the further they get from their scientific-based origins. In this instance, we can see where the tale came from, and watch where it's headed. So while the not deer may have begun with a rash of reports about animals suffering from chronic wasting disease, in the future it will be a story of a creature who exists among, but also apart from, the herd. As always, links will be provided in the show notes. The Esoteric Book Club can be found on Patreon, Facebook, and at esotericbookclub.org. This show is made possible by our generous patrons who, for as little as $1 a month, contribute to its creation. If you would like to make a single donation, the Esoteric Book Club now has a PayPal account, which I will also provide a link to in the show notes. Anyone who makes a one-time donation will be thanked by name on the next published episode. That's all I have for tonight, so until next time, remember, stay weird.